Hi, my name is Grant Miller. This is AP Crash Course for World History, and today we'll be talking about the struggle for power in India and South Africa.
Who cares about freedom when there's the Oasis?
Well, me from the future, things weren't always that simple.
India was among the first colonies to achieve independence and provided both a model and an inspiration for others, whereas South Africa, though not formally a colony, was among the last to throw off political domination by the whites.
That's right.
Benjamin Ali.
So let's go in order and start with India.
So, before the 20th century, few people thought of themselves as Indians, and identity was based more on family, caste, village, language, region, tribe, and/or religious practice.
Several innovations brought from Britain, such as railroads, telegraph lines, post offices, and the newspaper, all brought India closer together than it ever had been before.
This newfound Indian identity led to the creation of the Indian National Congress, also known as the Congress Party, in 1885.
The Indian National Congress was an association of English-educated Indians, including lawyers, journalists, teachers, and businessmen, mostly from prominent, high-caste Hindu families.
The INC did not initially plan to overthrow the British. Instead, they wished to have an influence on political, military, and business life of British India. They believed that they could speak for the interests of the Indians better than foreign-born rulers.
But the British mocked this proposal, and the Indian National Congress had a hard time gaining a following from India's large peasant population.
Things changed, however, when the British decided to attack the Ottoman Empire. This really ticked off the Indian Muslims and suddenly had some anger issues. Oh, there's also this influenza epidemic, which didn't make things too great either. And these both set the scene for Mohandas Gandhi. And with that, let's go to the thought bubble. Gandhi, represented here by Logan, was born to a family of the Vasya, or business caste. He was married at 13 years old and was mediocre in school. When he was 18, he studied law in England and returned as a shy and not very successful lawyer. In 1893, he accepted a job in South Africa. There, he experienced racism firsthand and began organizing Indians to protest policies of racial segregation. His philosophy was called Satyagraha, or truth force, and was confrontational, but not violent. So, Gandhi returned to India in 1915, where he quickly rose in the leadership ranks of the INC. During the next couple of decades, he held periodic mass campaigns that had support from members of every class. Gandhi's lifestyle appealed to almost all of India and transformed the INC into a major corporation. Gandhi helped raise the status of the untouchables and embraced efforts to mobilize women for the struggle against Britain and elevate their position in marriage and society. He believed that women's capacity for virtue and sacrifice made them perfect for peaceful protests.
And now, in Enchanted Time with Dr. Brett Von Zittler.
This is German silver. You can't find that in Mother Russia. Spotted my delta. The only thing you want in the skies is not my army. Okay, for crying out loud, where are all the women? Alright, I I know Gandhi didn't take them all. Oh my God! This was my first million.
Frick, think of something else to say.
Views, and this was my second million.
And now our feature presentation.
Since not everyone was on Gandhi's side, though. Yes, I am a professional. I know what I'm talking about. Such as those who believed in improving the role of the untouchables and, how do you say? The women! The women were being a distraction from the independence. Yes.
That concludes In Enchanted Time with me, Dr. Brett Van Zietla.
By far, the greatest roadblock to a unified movement was the political division between Hindu and Muslim populations.
Because there was a greater representation of Hinduism in India, many policies were passed that antagonized Muslims.
A new group called the Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, believed that those areas that had a larger Muslim population should have a different Muslim political status.
And they called it Pakistan, meaning land of the pure.
So after World War II, Britain left India, creating two independent countries in 1947.
The Muslim Pakistan.
And the mostly Hindu India.
Many died or were forced to move. As a result of the splitting of the country.
1 year after independence, my boy Gandhi was shot and killed.
What did she say? What you say? That you only meant well.
Triumph was overshadowed by tragedy.
Well, 'cause you did what you say.
And now it's time for a haiku with Logan, the part of the show where Logan comes out and gives a haiku.
Haiku by me, Logan Seville. The Indians won. They won their independence. Gandhi helped them win.
Thank you, Logan, for that beautiful piece of literature. Now, it's really important to recognize that the Indian independence movements were not only against Britain itself, but the Indian government and the scattered opinions within it.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, another battle for independence against Britain was being won.
Hi. Actually, Stephen, South Africa won its independence from Britain as early as 1910. The struggle for independence during this time period involved the black South Africans trying to establish their political voice amongst a dominant white South African population.
That's right, Logan. During the 1900s, white Africans held political dominance in South Africa. Like me. Can I say that?
These politically powerful people in the African community were known as Boers.
That's right.
All-star golfer Kenneth Duffin.
In the same way the Israelites were feared by the Egyptians, the Boer people feared a black majority African rule.
While India's economy was based on agriculture, South Africa had an industrial civilization, which included products such as gold and diamonds.
Newer forms of industry, such as investments and loans, became important as well.
And while new economic ideas emerged, old discrimination stayed the same. Black Africans worked in factories and white Africans ruled over them.
Speaking of which, let's see what's in the secret compartment. Whoa, it's a hard hat. This one's named Deborah. You know, the black South Africans really could have used these while they were working in the factories being ruled by the white South Africans.
Classic Logan.
Discrimination between black and white continued in 1948 with the policy of apartheid, which literally divided black and white in every way imaginable.
Past laws were enacted to control the traffic of Indians going in and out of cities.
And native reserves, or Bantustans, were used to keep Africans away from other settlers.
As you can imagine, this did not sit well with the South African natives, resulting in rebellions and strikes, and independent churches being formed to combat this unfair way of life.
Soon the African National Congress, or ANC, was formed, an assembly inspired by the Indian National Congress in earlier years.
To make things even worse, political tension between male and female began as females strived to obtain political voice. After decades of struggle, they succeeded in doing this in 1943.
Forces and all the king's men could not put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Oh, yes, leadership. New leaders arose. Leaders like Nelson Mandela, just like his counterpart Gandhi. Nelson Mandela chose to provide positive protests to effect his common goal of gaining rights for every man, woman, and child. There, is that it? Is that good enough? God bless. Books and notes! Books and notes!
Yes,
Brandon Jones.
you may leave.
Long story short, the South African government wasn't too happy about this whole uprising thing, and eventually the tension resulted in the shooting of 69 protesters in 1960.
Not to mention, Nelson Mandela was imprisoned immediately after this event, and the ANC was disassembled.
And after this, chaos erupted because most political parties were now disbanded or illegal.
Underground struggles began. Nationalist leaders participated in armed warfare to gain power, and young citizens became outspoken.
This is seen in the event in the neighborhood of Soweto, where an explosion occurred, killing hundreds of people.
It's believed that this explosion was some kind of impulse to the new idea to teach white African languages instead of the English language.
These changes promoted self-isolation in South Africa.
The Olympics were rejected, sports were not allowed to be played, and performers refused to go to South Africa completely.
It is important to understand that these radical ideas were not enforced by India.
Finally, in the 1980s, the white Africans started to realize that they were going to have a bloodbath on their hands. So, they did the reasonable thing and began negotiating with the lower class.
Nelson Mandela was released from prison.
The ANC was legalized,
and national elections began.
As in India, the South African nationalist movement was divided. However, unlike in India, these divisions did not occur along religious lines.
In this case, it was race and ideologies that made the divisions so easy.
Also, South Africa, unlike India, acquired its independence as an intact and unified state.
And now we have the quote of the day coming at you from Stephen Forster.
As Kwame Nkrumah once said, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and all these other things will be added unto you. Do what is right for the state, give yourself up for the state, then everything else will come into place."
Sounds like some quality communist philosophy, if you ask me.
I'd like to thank special guest speakers
Ben Ali, Brett Stevens, Steve Clare, Kenny Duffin, and Brandon Jones
for joining us today, and especially Mr. Justin Oates for giving me an A on this project. So, good night everyone, and thank you for tuning in.